The sun pressed down on forward operating base Rhino until every metal surface burned to the touch. The air shimmered above the gravel roads, and the wind carried a mix of dust and jet fuel. Helicopter rotors pulsed in the distance, a reminder that the war never stopped. Even inside the wire, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Glenn moved across the compound, her steps measured and steady. Her khaki OCP uniform coated with a thin film of desert grit. She had been deployed for 3 months, long enough for the rhythm of the base to become familiar, but not long enough for the weight of it to fade. The Sig Sauer M18 on her hip had become part of her, as natural as the tan boots that scuffed the ground beneath her. In her right hand, she carried a folder marked Top Secret, its contents bound for SEAL Team 7's command tent. The folder was heavy, not from paper, but from the responsibility inside it. Sarah paused in the shade of a concrete barrier, scanning the compound with a habit born of caution rather than fear. A convoy rumbled toward the motor pool, the metallic clatter echoing through the dry heat. She could feel the sun searing the back of her neck, sweat running down the spine beneath her uniform. In moments like this, she heard her father's voice again. Space is easy. Sarah, people are harder. He had said it years ago. After a lecture at MIT, when she had confessed she didn't want to follow him into NASA, her father, Colonel John Glenn, had seen the world from above, its beauty untouched by the chaos below. She had chosen to see it from the ground, where the dust got into your lungs and the choices you made could mean life or death. She had turned down NASA because she wanted to understand the human frontier, not the cosmic one. The mission briefings, the midnight calls, the quiet victories, they were her orbit now. She adjusted the strap of her sidearm and started toward the DFAC, her boots crunching against the gravel. Inside waited cold air, the smell of coffee, and a room full of strangers. She didn't know it yet, but in the next few minutes, a casual joke would turn that room silent and change the way everyone saw her. The DFAC buzzed with noise as Sarah stepped inside. The hum of voices mixing with the metallic clatter of trays and the low drone of air conditioning, the smell of powdered eggs, coffee, and hot sauce hung in the air. Soldiers filled the rows of tables, their uniforms streaked with dust, their laughter carrying the release that came after weeks of tension. Near the far wall, a group of SEAL operators sat together, bearded and broad-shouldered. Their posture relaxed, but their presence unmistakable. Sarah moved quietly to the serving line, her tan OCPs and untucked blue shirt making her look out of place among the uniformed crowd. She grabbed a plastic tray, picked up a bottle of water, an apple, and a protein bar. Her eyes stayed on the papers in her hand, the classified notes she had been reviewing since morning. She was used to the sideways looks. To them, she didn't fit the picture of someone who belonged. From across the room, Lieutenant James Reeves leaned back in his chair, watching her. His teammates followed his gaze, smirking among themselves. The man had the confident grin of someone who had been shot at and come out laughing. He nudged the guy beside him and nodded toward her. "Must be State Department," he said under his breath, loud enough for his buddies to chuckle. Sarah ignored the glance. She took a seat in the corner, setting her folder down beside her tray, pretending not to hear the comments that rolled through the group. Reeves raised his voice as he stood, tray in hand. "You lost. Harvard. You look like you wandered off from the embassy." The laughter that followed was good-natured, but sharp around the edges. Sarah didn't look up. "Just finishing some work before a meeting," she said evenly. Reeves smiled wider, sensing a target. "What's your rank?" "Ma'am, don't mind me asking." "Probably a contractor." "Right." She met his eyes across the table, her tone level. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Glenn, Naval Intelligence." She slid her credentials across the table with calm precision. The sound of chatter around them faltered, a ripple of quiet spreading through the room. Reeves blinked, his smirk fading. She stood, collecting her notes, her voice steady. "I'll be briefing your team on Operation Shadowhawk in 30 minutes." The silence deepened as she walked away, her footsteps echoing on the tile. The SEALs watched her go, and for the first time that day, Reeves didn't have anything clever to say. The operations room was dim, lit mostly by the blue glow of screens and the low hum of projectors. A digital map of the Korangal Valley spread across the table, scattered with markers and coordinates. RQ-20 Puma drone footage played on one monitor, showing narrow ridgelines and clusters of heat signatures. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Glenn stood at the front, calm and focused, pointing to the valley's southern ridge where Taliban activity had spiked in the past 72 hours. The SEALs sat around the table, a mix of fatigue and alertness in their faces. Commander Mark Jackson leaned forward, arms folded. Lieutenant Reeves sat near the back, his expression skeptical but quiet. Sarah outlined the situation clearly, explaining that multiple ISR satellites had tracked insurgent movements in and out of the compound near the valley floor. Intelligence indicated the site was shielding a high-value target tied to coordinated attacks on American assets. Her tone never wavered as she moved through the details, layering topography with threat assessments and probability charts. Reeves broke the silence first. "How sure are you this isn't another wild lead? Last time we went into a valley like that, we spent 2 days chasing shadows." Sarah met his eyes, her voice even. "I know this valley. Lieutenant, I was there 2 weeks ago." That drew a few glances around the table. She continued, "My team worked with the National Directorate of Security to extract a compromised asset. We were ambushed during exfil. One of my men didn't make it out." She didn't raise her voice or ask for sympathy. She just let the words sit there. Jackson studied her, then looked back at the screen. "You were on the ground in Korangal," she nodded. Took a round across the arm. "Minor through and through." He said nothing for a moment, watching her. Then he turned to the team. "She'll be coming with us." That stopped the room cold. Reeves frowned. "Sir, intel stays at the base." "Right," Jackson shook his head. "Not this time. She's the only one who's had eyes on that valley and contact with the local source. She'll brief you again during a prep." The decision settled over the room like dust. Sarah gathered her files, the weight of what was coming pressing against her ribs. She had been behind screens and satellite feeds for most of this deployment. Now, she would be back in the field, walking beside the men who had questioned her only hours ago. The map flickered behind her as she stepped out, the blue light fading from her face, but not from her resolve. The command center was quiet, except for the soft hum of electronics and the faint static of radio chatter. Blue light from the digital maps washed over the faces of the small group huddled around the table. Live drone feeds showed the southern ridge of the Korangal Valley alive with movement. Heat signatures flaring across the screen like embers. 30 enemy fighters. Maybe more. Fortified along the path the team had planned to take. Commander Jackson's voice broke the silence. "The mission still stands. That compound holds intelligence tied to planned attacks on U.S. targets. We can't afford to wait." Sarah stood opposite him, eyes fixed on the satellite imagery. The route on the southern approach was a death trap. She studied the terrain overlay, tracing elevation lines with her fingertip until she stopped at the northern face of the valley. It was a solid wall of granite, steep and narrow, marked by almost no heat signatures. She spoke quietly, her tone factual, not challenging. "We can insert from the north. It's steep, near vertical. The enemy won't expect it." The room shifted, a few heads turning toward her. One of the SEALs muttered under his breath, "That's not a route. That's a cliff." Sarah zoomed in on the digital map, pointing at the shaded ridges. "It's impassable to them because they think it's suicide. But this face here," she said, marking a narrow section. "It has anchor points and ledges. If we start at night, with ropes and NVGs, we can climb it undetected." Jackson leaned over the table, skeptical. You ever seen that kind of terrain up close? Sarah nodded once. El Capitan. Twice. Her answer drew a pause that filled the room. Jackson exhaled slowly. Studying the data, the longer he looked, the more sense it made. The northern face offered concealment, an element of surprise, and a straight line to the target compound. He turned to his team, his tone resigned but resolute. All right, we move from the north. We'll insert at 2300. Glenn, you're on the roster. You'll guide the approach. The decision landed heavy. Sarah gave a single nod. The respect in the room was quiet but real. For the first time, she wasn't just briefing the mission. She was part of it. At 2300 hours, the Chinook skimmed low over the dark mountains, its twin rotors carving deep into the cold Afghan air. Inside the cargo bay, red light filled the space, casting long shadows over gear and faces. The team sat shoulder to shoulder, each lost in quiet focus. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of rotors and the occasional click of weapons being checked. Sarah sat between Reeves and Commander Jackson, gloved hands steady as she adjusted her AN PVS 31 night vision goggles and ran her thumb along the receiver of her M4A1. The air inside smelled of metal, oil, and adrenaline. Reeves checked his rope harness, his grin barely visible under the NVG mount. He looked over at her, his tone soft enough to be swallowed by the noise. First time fast roping at this altitude, Sarah's voice was calm. Not my first time on a mountain. He gave a nod that wasn't quite a smile. Across from them, Jackson lifted a hand, signaling 30 seconds. Everyone moved with precision. Gloves tightened, weapon locked. The rear ramp opened, and the roar of the wind filled the cabin. They went down fast, boots hitting hard dirt, the night swallowing them whole. The Chinook banked away, fading into the distance as the sound of the rotors disappeared behind the ridgeline. The team spread out immediately, forming a tight perimeter around the landing zone. Hand signals flashed through the darkness. No words, only movement. The air was thin, and every breath tasted of dust and frost. Sarah checked her surroundings through the NVGs, her heartbeat steady as the green landscape unfolded before her. They began the climb, slow and deliberate, each man roped to the next. The granite face loomed above them, jagged and cold. Sarah led part of the route, her movements fluid from years of climbing. The others followed, careful, deliberate, trusting her sense of footing. Reeves climbed behind her, watching how she placed each hand and foot with precision. Halfway up, the night erupted below them. The sudden crack of gunfire echoed through the valley, followed by searchlights sweeping across the lower ridges. Sarah froze, scanning through her thermal scope. Heat signatures flickered in chaos below. She recognized the pattern immediately. American troops. A Special Forces ODA pinned down and surrounded. She keyed her .com. Air voice low. Those are our people. Jackson's voice came back hard. Not our mission. Sarah's reply cut through the static. We can still finish the objective if we split. They need help. The silence stretched long enough for the wind to fill it. Finally, Jackson gave a single word. Split. Reeves and half the team would move toward the fight. Sarah, Jackson, and two others would continue to the target. The mountain seemed to grow darker as the teams separated, their paths diverging into the unknown. Commander Jackson made the call without hesitation. Reeves would take 3 men to assist the pinned Special Forces team, while he, Sarah, and 2 other operators would move on the compound. The team split in silence, each group disappearing into the shadows of the mountain. The night swallowed their movements. Only the faint crunch of boots on gravel and the muted click of gear breaking the quiet. Sarah stayed behind Jackson, scanning the terrain through her NVG as they advanced along the northern ridge. Every motion was deliberate. Every step counted. The climb flattened into a rocky slope, and Jackson signaled a short halt with a raised fist. Through her FLIR monocular, Sarah saw faint heat signatures near a stone wall below. 2 guards, both armed and stationary, their breath glowing faintly in the cold air. She crouched, tapping Jackson's arm and pointing toward the targets. He nodded once. The SEALs moved into position, one covering while the other advanced in perfect rhythm. Suppressed, HK 416 bursts broke the stillness. 2 quick flashes of fire, both guards dropped without sound. Inside the compound, the air smelled of dust and oil. The team swept room by room, clearing corners in practiced silence. Sarah found the hidden door behind a stack of crates, the seam barely visible in the wall. Jackson covered her as she pried it open, revealing a narrow stairway leading down. In the small underground chamber, she spotted hard drives, binders, and marked maps spread across a table. She pulled out her encrypted data drive, plugging it into a laptop, capturing images and copying files. The intelligence matched everything she had feared: coordinated attacks on U.S. embassy across multiples régions. Before she could finish, a deep concussion shook the building. Dust rained from the ceiling. Reeves's voice broke through comms, tight and strained. Heavy fire. Martinez is hit. Need cover now. Sarah checked her attack tablet, tracing their position. They can reach us through the north wall, she said quickly. Jackson gave the order, said defense. The SEALs shifted instantly, posting along windows and doorways. The first bursts of enemy gunfire cracked through the night. Sarah returned fire in short, steady bursts, her M4A1 recoiling against her shoulder. The sound was rhythmic, controlled. A grenade clattered against the floor near her. She reacted before thinking, kicking it into a shallow trench outside the doorway. The explosion ripped through the air, deafening but distant enough to spare them. Reeves's team broke through moments later, dragging Martinez by his harness, his blood dark against the dirt. Jackson pulled them inside, shouting for smoke. The team regrouped in the haze, hearts pounding, lungs burning. Outside, the last echoes of gunfire faded into the valley. Sarah lowered her rifle, her hands trembling only for a second. The compound was theirs. But the night was far from over. Smoke still drifted from the shattered compound when Jackson gave the order to move. Martinez was losing blood fast, his breathing shallow and uneven, as Reeves and another SEAL hoisted him onto an improvised stretcher. The extraction point had gone silent. The radio call came back with static and a flat response. The LZ was compromised. Sarah studied the map on her tablet, her voice steady despite the chaos. There's a village 2 miles north. They helped me once before. They'll shelter us until dusk. Jackson's hesitation was brief but visible. You trust them. Sarah looked up. With my life, the team started north, moving under the cover of darkness. The mountain air bit at their faces, dry and thin, every step crunching against loose rock. They walked in a wedge formation, keeping 10-meter spacing, rifles sweeping the dark. Martinez's weight slowed them, but no one complained. The silence was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the wind and the occasional hiss of their radios. Twice they froze as distant voices drifted through the cold air. Twice they fought. The first contact came from the right flank, a short burst of gunfire that cut the night in half. Jackson's fist went up. The SEALs dropped to prone, returning fire with clean, measured precision. Sarah stayed low, scanning through her NVG, marking targets with a laser pointer. A quick exchange. 3 minutes. Silence again. The second patrol came an hour later, closer and more desperate. Sarah moved with calm focus, her shots controlled and deliberate. When the last echo faded, she turned to Reeves. Move. Now. They didn't stop again until the first light brushed the horizon. The village appeared like a shadow, mud walls blending into the pale landscape. An older man stood waiting at the edge of the path, his weathered face unreadable, until he saw Sarah. They exchanged words in Pashto, soft and quick. He nodded and waved them forward. Beneath his home, a narrow cellar opened, lined with old blankets and the faint smell of earth. The team laid Martinez down as a local doctor appeared frozen in the Mersend. His hands already stained from years of tending to wounds like these. Sarah pulled her PRC 152 radio from her vest, adjusting the frequency before speaking. Shadowhawk team. Requesting extraction at grid 3-8, Sierra Victor Charlie, 964-175. LZ Green. 6 hours. She received confirmation before leaning back against the wall. Exhaustion finally creeping in. Jackson ordered rest in shifts. His voice keyed her now. Almost human. Reeves approached her in the half-light. When I first saw you, I thought you were just a desk officer. Now I know better. Sarah didn't look up. My father used to say courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what has to be done despite it. The words hung in the air, soft as the wind outside. Somewhere far off, a helicopter's hum rolled across the valley. The dawn settled over the village, fragile and fleeting, like the pause before another storm. Dusk settled slowly over the valley, washing the jagged mountains in gray light. The air had turned cold, thin, and sharp, carrying the scent of dust and smoke. 24 hours of movement and fighting had stripped everyone down to focus and fatigue. The team gathered in silence. Weapons checked. Gear lightened. Martinez lay secured on a stretcher, his pulse stronger now. A line of IV tubing, glinting in the fading light. Sarah crouched beside him, the soft hum of the PRC 152 radio in her ear as she confirmed extraction. Black Hawk inbound. 10 minutes. NVG approach. Commander Jackson gave the order to move. They left the safety of the village and crossed a narrow trail that wound along the foothills. Each man kept 5 meters apart, watching their arcs, scanning the shadows that stretched long across the rocks. The sound of boots crunching against gravel mixed with the low murmur of wind sweeping through the valley. Then, faint at first, came the deep pulse of rotor blades. It grew steadily, echoing between the cliffs, a heartbeat made of steel and air. The team crouched, forming a defensive perimeter around the LZ as dust whipped into the air. The Black Hawk appeared through the twilight. Lights dimmed, rotors cutting the sky with practiced precision. Jackson turned to his team. He didn't raise his voice. You all did your job. Then his eyes found Sarah. What you did today was beyond your orders. You saved lives, changed the mission, and kept us all moving. I'll be recommending you for the Silver Star. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Reeves simply met Sarah's eyes and gave a small nod that said everything words couldn't. The helicopter touched down hard, the door gunners scanning the perimeter. The team moved fast. Martinez loaded first, his stretcher secured against the cabin wall. One by one, they climbed aboard, the thump of the rotors deafening as the valley dropped away beneath them. Sarah took the last seat near the ramp. She turned once, looking back at the mountains. The same ridges that had tested her will were now fading into shadow. Her father had once seen the world from space, a globe of calm light and quiet beauty. She had seen it from its roughest edge, where courage lived in silence and fear was just part of the air you breathed. Both views, she realized, were the same truth from different heights. Both were fighting for the same fragile world, still turning under the same sky. The helicopter faded into the night, a shrinking sound swallowed by the wind. Inside, no one spoke. The mountains below were dark now, only faint outlines against the fading light. The mission was over, but the weight of it lingered. Sarah sat quietly, her gloves resting on her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She wasn't thinking about medals or recognition. She was thinking about the silence of the valley, the people they left behind, and the men who now looked at her differently. It had begun in a cafeteria, with laughter and assumptions, a woman with a folder and calm eyes surrounded by warriors who didn't yet know her name. Hours later, those same men followed her into the fire, trusting her judgment, her steadiness, and her courage. Respect had shifted, not because of what she said, but because of what she did. In the end, rank and gender had nothing to do with it. What mattered was the moment when fear met action, and she never flinched. The story wasn't about glory. It was about the quiet strength that carries people through impossible things, the kind that doesn't need applause or headlines. It was in the way Sarah kept her composure under fire, in the way she trusted strangers to help them survive, in the way she saw leadership not as command, but as responsibility somewhere far below. The lights of forward operating base Rhino glowed faintly against the dark. Soon they would land, file their reports, and move on to the next mission. But something had changed, something that wouldn't make it into the official record. In a world of noise, she had spoken through action. In a room full of doubt, she had earned silence. And in a war that never stopped, she had reminded them all that bravery and respect have no gender. And true leadership is proven, not proclaimed.